What I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about is some research I've been doing with a variety of collaborators, thinking about how digital humanities teams work together and where we need to start from, the individual working to the team, thinking about what we need institutionally to support these teams, and then as we move to a national, regional, and international perspective, what needs to be in there. So with that, whoops. There we go. Okay, so the context of this, and given the diversity around the table here, I mean, increasingly academics are undertaking collaborative projects. It allows us to do, bigger projects, more sophisticated projects, and in fact, in many cases, bring together perspectives needing to look at, typical research questions or even new research questions with different kinds of perspectives there, and perhaps getting new insights to these kinds of things. And within this, digital humanities projects are really becoming an exemplar for these kind of projects because of the range of expertise and skills and knowledge that need to be done to undertake these projects. You're really leading the way in that regard. And we bring together our content experts, librarians, archivists, programmers, developers, managers of different types, and of course disciplinary expertise. And we're seeing again with these projects the potential for greater creativity, innovation, larger scope, scale, complexity than might be possible with a single individual. We're also seeing increasingly with these teams, because of advances made in our information technology, and today's a great example of this, bringing in the other campuses. These teams are also now spreading across campuses, nationally, internationally, that brings in a whole range of things we need to think about how to manage across distance, culture, languages, and countries. And with that, funding agencies as well. And there are increasingly joint funding projects where we've got more than one funding agency involved, and digging into data is probably one of the best examples, though I don't think Australia is in there yet, right? No, so I think the last round for the digging into data, we have about 5 countries, 7 funding agencies collaborating together, which is actually quite amazing, but becomes a bit of a real administrative challenge for the teams that get these grants. While we've got great potential with these projects, we do see as we bring together these different perspectives, work across the distance, there is greater potential for miscommunication, tensions. There's a need for greater coordination. And with this brings really some interesting questions. When we bring these teams together, how do we bring together people who may not have been traditionally trained how to work together to in fact work together? And academics, we take great pride in our individuality, which doesn't always work well when we're working with other academics or those who are more collaborative in nature. And then it raises a question too, is what sort of infrastructure needs to be in place to in fact support these teams, thinking on the local level within an institution, but also as we begin to think about it at a national, regional, and international basis. So these are some of the questions that I've really been putting some thinking behind in the last couple of years and working with some great collaborators on this. And what we've really found with this is it becomes really a sort of nested context that we need to begin to think about. And teams can't think about these other contexts in isolation, that teams in fact work and have to consider what's happening at a local level, national, and international level. So what does each look like in turn? Well, the starting point within any team is individual. There is a series of individuals that come together, and within this individual that we really see there are certain kinds of people that are better suited for collaborative work than others. And in North America, and maybe you have this in Australia, it's everything I needed to know in life I learned in kindergarten. This, and one of the things is play well in the sandbox, share your toys. And that's really what we see within these types of teams, that we need people who are collaborative ready, that come with these sense of these soft skills, the ability to listen, the ability to negotiate, the ability to be flexible, open to different perspectives. Typically not things we develop in our graduate students. And in fact, our graduate students, at least in North America, maybe it's different here in Australia, humanities, we send them to the library and we say, come out in a couple years and produce your big magnus opus there. And in fact, increasingly, whether our graduate students stay within the academy or go work in, the related positions, go into the GLAM sector with our galleries, libraries, archives, museum, or even into industry, teamwork is such a key part of it. It's prompting these discussions. Should we be weaving this into our humanities graduate programs in particular? But the last thing that we think about within these team projects as we bring together the individuals is making sure we also have a research question that actually is suited well to working within a team. Some research projects are still best done as individuals. Others, in fact, need a team approach, though, in some cases our funding agencies are driving this to some extent that it appears to be easier to get funding when it's a team project and, rather than as an individual. So see how that one works out. But, it's really that evaluating, do we need a group of people to come together? As we then build out from the individual to the team, we, really see, again, kind of the typical digital humanities project, if there is one. We bring together a content expert, we bring together a programmer, we might bring together a librarian, and then of course, we've got, go back here, and we've got the graduate student who actually does the work for us, right? Sorry, graduate students. I know there are a few here in the room. We were all once one as well. It's really how do we bring these different perspectives, different skills, different knowledge together, and in fact communicate across these. And within this is, probably a really good point in time to, define our term and really what we mean when we use the term team. And as you look at the management literature, a team is that set of individuals who work interdependently. So we have the sense of tasks moving between people within the team and then are ultimately jointly accountable for the outcomes. So that at some point in time, as a group, they stand up and say, here's what we've done and we've done it together. And some of the benefits that we've found as we've looked in our research is, we see teams, they say we couldn't do this without the team approach. That by bringing these people together with these diverse perspectives, we get more diverse and potentially higher quality ideas. That the sum of the individuals is in fact, much larger. That there's also a sense that we got distribution of the work. These are projects where one person couldn't in fact do all the work, but also that responsibility was distributed across the team, that no one person felt responsible for the full scale of the project, and there were people standing alongside that were all invested in the outcomes. We also were hearing from the teams we interviewed, it was a great opportunity to learn new skills and perspectives, that it was exposure to different kinds of ideas than we get typically if we stay within our relatively narrow disciplinary focus. And again, the teams we interviewed very much agreed that the team approach was needed because of the diverse type of work that needed to be done, needed the skills and the expertise. And the last thing we heard, and we heard this one predominantly from the academics, is it was in fact a chance to be social and even have a bit of fun.
Oh,
well, I'll show the contrary perspective in just a minute. But, and this might have come from more people who traditionally come from, the more independently oriented. They really liked, and I'll talk about meals and beer and wine as a research tool, that it was an opportunity to have those kind of social encounters that they might not ordinarily, and in fact have a bit of fun. when we ran a survey jointly between digital humanities and digital librarians, the digital librarians did not come out scoring the social and fun as highly. And we speculated them, for that group, it was like, oh God, another project, and I'm going to have to work with an academic, you know, oh. yeah.
Ivory tower.
Yeah, you know, and they never listen to the deadlines, and you know, so that's why the potentially is there in brackets, and again. You know, for some of these projects, it was, in fact, a very pragmatic approach. The granting agency required a collaborative approach, and that's why they undertook it. But we do see, you know, there were the usual challenges with this. Anytime you have more than one person involved, not to say that, you know, one person doesn't experience these things too, but, and it was, say, a sense of an exponential growth. As you added more people to the team, challenges with scheduling, time commitments, because we're all working on multiple things. Very few of these projects had a person who was devoted 100% to the project. For the most part, it was one piece of which, when someone added it up, all the things they had to do, it was already more than 100%. Communication and coordination challenges, and of course, you know, the interpersonal personality difficulties that may be part of teams. But we also found that while you know, the potential was there with the great diversity, it brought a set of challenges that needed to be carefully thought about and managed in some regard. That we had differing skill sets and perspectives that needed to be understood and perhaps even translated. As you know, the humanities person doesn't necessarily understand the language of a computer scientist or a programmer, and vice versa, and we had to find ways to allow that translation to happen. There was often an apparent lack of appreciation for the valuable skills and perspectives that others brought in the team, and certainly on campuses we have a sense of hierarchy and who can contribute to what, and that was something that really needed to be addressed. How do we recognize everyone was providing valuable contribution? And then again, the culture and language gaps between people from different groups. You know, different groups have different ways of doing things. How do we manage? You know, how do we think across those, and how do we communicate it so all understand? And so we found that there was, in fact, a variety of tools that these teams were using. One is a project charter, a formally documented agreement on how people will work together, how they'll make decisions, how work will be divided up, and how they'll be accountable to each other. So, you know, if someone doesn't deliver, what sort of mechanisms might be already worked out within the team to ensure that. And when I say formally documented, I mean it really depended on the size of the team, what form that documentation would take. For relatively small teams, it might be as simple as an email. For other teams, you know, in one case, with one project, it's, you know, about 40-page document, but that's because it's 40 researchers, army of graduate students across 4 countries. It was much more complex. We also found that as much as we feel comfortable in the digital environment, and digital humanities is, I think, you know, by the nature of the discipline, if you want to call it, or community practice, has led the way, we still could not do without face-to-face meetings. That was very important to bring the team together, particularly at the stage of planning the research project, and the sense that that should be done before you write the grant or formally articulate what you're going to do. And these face-to-face meetings were very important from a couple of perspectives. One, it really helped the project begin to define the working vocabulary. So, you know, disciplines define terms in different ways. Models mean different things depending whether you're in math, economics, in social sciences. So what, in fact, does it mean for your particular project? It was the opportunity to plan the project objectives, outcomes, and tasks. And that is something that's not necessarily easily done over email. It needs to be done in some senses around a table where you can see the whites of everyone's eyes, so to speak, and ensure everybody, in fact, is committing to what they said they're going to do. And work out those areas that are potentially ambiguous, or potentially fraught with conflict. And that's the kind of thing that works out best in, say, the formal planning meetings around the table, but perhaps more importantly, the informal meetings that go on around the coffee breaks and the dinner table afterwards. I'm on a quest with our national funding agency. I don't know if yours is different, but we're not allowed to expense alcohol against our grants, which I think is a really shortfall on our granting agency's part. I mean, I realize we need limits, but I'm on a quest to get that counted, because I think good wine, good beer, good food is very important for team building activities. And I have a few papers on that, so if you need the justification, just let me know.
It's harder than you like.
Yeah, well, no, we actually have to produce the receipt for the lunch to show that there isn't alcohol on there. So, yeah, so obviously Australia is more enlightened, and when you work with French colleagues, they're just baffled. It's like, really? You can't, no wine? Really? And the last thing that these teams are using is, a sense of a translator, someone who speaks both humanities and digital, and that they can then translate for the two parties who maybe don't have that language facility. I still think we need a travel guide for digital humanities. In the back is commonly used phrases. When you say database, this is what you mean, and this is how you say it. But that's really what the teams have been looking at. And that's, where, again, when we think about, the increasing number of training programs and master's projects and PhD programs in digital humanities, or whatever it's called, that's really what we're training, is those translators who can go into the projects. But we always have to remember that teams function within an institutional context, and when you bring collaborators together who represent several institutional contexts, then not only are you trying to coordinate within your team, you're actually trying to coordinate across a variety of institutions, and I'm sure even across the different campuses, there's different ways of doing some things that need to be worked out within that. And what we find there, that when we want to start to kind of bring together, at least on within one institutional framework, we need a sense where we can be bringing together these people in the different contexts, and I call it a collaborative space. It might be a center, it might be something virtual. In this case, working across 3 campuses, it'll be a sense of virtual, but you ultimately, again, need a physical space of some point in time where people can come together, because what we find in the research, that as soon as you separate people by more than 30 meters, that potential for those casual conversations where some of the real, creative opportunities happen decrease, right? And then you look across 3, 5 campuses here. I mean, it's much harder, and we're less likely to do that in a technical means. Though, having said that, in Ray's lab right now, we're experimenting with some open Skype walls, where we keep a Skype channel open between different sites to see, does that get us kind of closer to, that casual conversation that happens over, the coffee pot, or, in line. But what we find when we kind of bring together this collaborative space is, again, this idea that we're trying to build the sense of being able to do more than an individual can do, bringing in those different perspectives. We also get the sense of a common or shared infrastructure, so we're not trying to duplicate across everyone's individual offices, but in fact put a few workstations in one place where people can come use it. And get that fewer duplications. But it also becomes those focal point or nexus for the new relationships, research opportunities, teaching, and outreach. And again, that cross-disciplinary thinking that we need in these kinds of projects. And with this, I think some of the key infrastructure is, some comfortable couches and a coffee machine, and a whiteboard, to begin that information sharing. And again, this collaborative space brings together the researchers in the projects, instructors, students. We also think about aligning it with institutional priorities. We're quite excited at University of Victoria right now that in our institution strategic plan, digital humanities is front and center, which then allows us to use that to build on some of the things we're trying to do at a faculty level or department level or student level. It also, brings us opportunity to bring in some of our outside stakeholder priorities too. And this is, thinking about our funding agencies, looking at, what the public libraries or national libraries and archives are doing, some of the museums, building towards certain kind of events. I know in New Zealand they're doing quite a bit of work as we come up to, the anniversary on key things out of World War I. That it's providing, those great opportunities to kind of get some projects moving forward because we can tie them into some of those larger priorities. It also becomes a way to bring together some key decision makers and build those relationships. So as you're trying to advance, what you do with digital humanities projects, you can begin to show those people who help make things happen on campus what's happening and convince them to go out and do your proselytizing, if you want to call it that. It's a way to bring together funds, space, equipment, people that might be working in isolation, and in fact give them a common home to be in, where again we can capitalize on those relationships to do more than we might have thought otherwise. And again, thinking about working with timing, events, people that are coming through to create those opportunities to bring people together. But of course, our projects don't operate in isolation. We also need to be thinking, at a national level, regional level, as you think about your counterparts in New Zealand and elsewhere, and then of course differentially. And this is where, that complexity gets even, more complex. When we think about, bringing in differing levels of technological infrastructure across different sites, looking at bringing in different kinds of libraries, archives, museum. We bring in our collaborators. We also bring in partner institutions with all their differing fiscal and academic calendars, reporting structure. One example I really like on this, one of the people we interviewed on this project was based in Japan, working North American collaborators. Her collaborators had to submit paperwork to the Japanese institution. Became very problematic because in Japan you need your chop. Everyone has a stamp with their, like their official signature. Of course, the North Americans did it, so their paperwork wasn't considered complete because the chop wasn't there. And that created immense amount of paperwork trying to convince the accounting people that no, this was in fact acceptable and to put it in. But even when you can meet, we don't all break at the same time around the world for the same amount of time. We're thinking about different governments and legal frameworks, what we can actually do in terms of intellectual property, copyright, access to data, looking excuse me, at our different academic disciplines, associations, and how those even differ culturally on what's considered appropriate output. We also have another complexity with who actually holds the data we want to access, and of course our granting agencies who all have different reporting forms, different CV forms, different word lengths on how much you can say. So what we found then, as we started to think about this, again, this kind of collaboration is very important. Some projects you need those international collaborators because of where the expertise exists, where the data exists. But we find geography presents at one level relatively simple challenges that we can work with. Impact of multiple time zones on scheduling and cost of travel. I have to keep remembering it's yesterday at home, and working across the time zones. I think to Europe, what, you guys are almost exactly opposite?
It's about 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah, depending on where.
To Western Europe, yeah. And to Western North America, it's like 18. That's really, really hard.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is a genuine issue for us as well as the travel things.
Though most definitely for us in Canada, we find it too. We're 4.5 time zones. Newfoundland's on the half hour. I'm not sure why. I've never heard the reason, but they are. And I think I figured out once we're only all in the office in Canada for about 2 hours in a day, and for us to go to our capital for a meeting is actually at least a 2-day commitment, if not 3 days, because depending on when the meeting ends, you may not be able to get out of the airport again that night. So, you know, we understand that. Not necessarily easy to address, but simple to understand. Again, that greater distance limits the creativity, innovation, and we haven't found ways to really have the technology facilitate that yet. And of course, issues of infrastructure availability and or government policy, and of course the Great Firewall of China is probably one of the best known examples, but there are others. And one thing that came up when we were in Beirut quite a bit is the idea of those who do not hold multiple passports have a very tough time traveling outside of Lebanon. So if you have only a Lebanese passport, it's very, very difficult to travel, whereas those with British, North American passports, much easier. But we do see at a more complex level, we see that the differences in culture and language impact teamwork in much more complex and perhaps subtle ways that we may not even realize from the outset. How we structure a team, how we communicate, how we resolve decisions, conflicts, all culturally based. The team may in fact have to determine a working language. I guess in our case, you know, flipping, is it Canadian English or Australian English? Are we going to talk? I've been having a very tough time ordering coffee here because I can't figure out a short black, long black. I don't know. You know, I just want a coffee. And that may become a very political decision in some contexts. And in fact, the person who would be most logically the lead for the project may not be able to because they don't have the facility in the working language. Common terms with different institutional meetings may have to be translated. A research assistant in North America is somebody who's doing their graduate work 10 to 20 hours a week, paid a pittance, exploit them. In UK, maybe in Australia, it's the same thing. Their research assistant is in fact someone who's completed their PhD. You still pay them a pittance, but at least it's a full-time pittance-ish. And you know, we found, how do you work through those kind of terms? And then we may even need to define the concept of time, what that means in different cultures, and how that, you know, plays into performance measures, team rhythms. Again, Beirut, the number of national holidays they have because of the different religious groups. Our host said it's amazing anything gets done, and it becomes very difficult working with international collaborators because, you know, don't always think to communicate when a holiday may be. And even things like how we define time in a sec, it's not literal, it's figurative. But we found our teams that we interviewed actually had to, you know, work through different types of impacts on the team. Language and cultural differences in terms of terminology, but even how hierarchy was expressed. In some cultures, it was very important that the doctor or the professor is before the name. In Canada, we're much more informal, and that's less important to be there and had to be worked around. But even the idea of, you know, the structure the data is in, whether what was of interest to one international partner could actually be reproduced in another country. Different comfort levels in the team's working language, differing accesses to and comfort levels with different kinds of technology, access to scanners, video, server capacity, that kind of thing. The differing requirements from funding agencies, reporting structures. And again, the institutional differences, how, you know, paperwork has to be done when term time is off, fiscal year end, everybody had a different time of the year that they were desperately trying to spend all their money. And travel was, you know, they did a lot of travel, but it was still you know, tough to get the whole team together. And again, and I'm sure you folks hear this all the time, some travel was deemed as collaborators. It's just too far to go, but they didn't hesitate to ask those who were in the too far to, in fact, to go. Yes, yeah. And of course, the expense and time. But they found, you know, we've got it on different levels. I mean, the projects found ways to work together that they really worked to have a project manager or a liaison who tried to work through these varying challenges, worked very much to the central data storage ideas, and again, face-to-face meetings. Again, for planning purposes, but it was also important to travel to a collaborator's context so I had a great sense of what it meant to be in that context. In Beirut, when it rains, the internet goes out. And so you need to be there to understand, you know, that may be why your collaborator can't even call you on Skype kind of thing. They found it very important to have protocols, contracts, MOUs in place that began to document how they are going to work together, and time. It takes time to develop collaborations that are spread, you know, nationally or internationally. We found it was very important on the individual level for people to have experiences in other cultures, and even better if they had more than one language. I'm a unilingual Canadian, so it does become problematic for me at some levels. That in fact, a lot of times they develop long-term collaborations, that they found a group of people, they worked together well and kept going from project to project. And again, that importance of the soft skills, that patience, flexibility, openness to the different perspectives. And thinking more globally, again, working with our funding agencies as we move to more joint funding projects, move to, in fact, try and align reporting requirements, align the documentation so that it becomes easier for the teams, so they can spend more time on what they actually came together to do, the research, and less time on all that other stuff. And again, really looking to increase those opportunities for exchanges for our graduate students, faculty, staff, so that we spend time in other cultures and contexts and have appreciation for everything, that things are not like they are at home. And that leads to the soft skills. So yeah, so just to kind of wrap up that as we look to develop these collaborative projects, we always have to remember those larger contexts that we work in. They provide great opportunity for our projects, but things we again need to manage and work through, and by being aware of those in advance, we can minimize the impact that they might have on the teams. Thank you very much.